Oh, look at that beautiful sourdough bread. Anyways, the old coot here coming back at you with another exciting video. This one I'm going to try to focus on how do you know when your home baked bread or sourdough is done, right? Without having to like check it every 2 seconds and cut into it and then, ruin that whole process. But anyways, here's what I did to kind of bring everybody up to speed. Just quick, broad strokes, big picture. This is what happened. I think this is a KitchenAid Kenmore, I can't remember, KitchenAid. It's a double oven, right? And I'm using the lower oven on the middle rack, right? So there's the middle rack is the one that I used. And it's still pretty hot. Okay. And what I did was I set the oven to 465 degrees Fahrenheit on the convection bake mode. All that's going to do is it's just going to circulate the air around the dough so that it cooks more evenly, right? You get a more even color all the way around. And at the same time, it's supposed to help with the baking process. In your situation at home, if you're watching this video, you're going to have to experiment with your oven. You're going to have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. So you might need to do this process 3 times, 10 times. Eventually, you'll find what works best for your oven and your specific situation. Another thing is if you're baking bread and you're noticing that the bread just isn't rising the right way, or it takes forever to cook it, you may need to check on your oven's components. Like maybe your burner is out, right? Or it's failing, or the flame igniter thing isn't working correctly. You kind of get the idea. But let's assume everything is working correctly. It's still a process. I'm just telling you what works for me in this specific situation. And if you learn some knowledge from that, great. Okay, so 465 degrees Fahrenheit. I put the bread on the cooking tray, whatever this thing is called. I've had this thing forever. I don't even know who makes this thing anymore. But what I do is from the battens that came out of the fridge, this will be a whole nother video, put them on the tray, right? And I usually try to arrange them in kind of like a V shape because I'm doing 2 loaves. And then I have a ramekin with some water, right? About 3/4 of the way full. I'm not going to touch it because I know it's still hot. But right now the water is like almost completely evaporated. What the water does is it creates a moist environment inside of that oven so that you get a more crunchier crust. And at the same time, it helps to develop some of that color, like some of that brownish, tannish, maybe dark brown color, if I want to let it go a little bit longer. So the bread goes in, right, at around 40 minutes. So 40 minutes of baking at 465 degrees, right, the bake setting. What I'll do is I'll take the temperature, and this is really the correct way to do this. So I like this Thermo Pro, whatever you want to call this thing, probing thermometer, I don't know, whatever it's called. What I do is I go ahead and put this in, and where I try to stick it literally is somewhere like top to bottom in the middle, and then somewhere left to right in the middle, just so that I'm in the center line of the bread. And I try to go also this way. I try to go in like somewhere in the middle. So I'm really trying to find like the center. It doesn't have to be perfect, as long as you're close enough. But usually there will be a seam, like right here is where I stuck it. There will usually be some kind of seam that doesn't have like the crusty crust, like the hard crust. It'll be maybe where it's split, right? Where you got that ear, where the dough separated to allow for expansion for that last little bit of, magic to happen to makes the dough rise. But usually there'll be a place where you should be able to stick the thermometer. So when I went ahead and put the probe in there, right, the probe part, and shoved it in there, I'm looking for a temperature of 210 degrees Fahrenheit. So 210 degrees Fahrenheit to me is the ideal place where you have this cooked bread on the inside, but it's still pullable, it's chewy, right? You get that nice sourdough kind of feel out of a slice of bread. Or if you want to hand pull this and, pull it apart like in chunks or whatever, it's totally fine. But I feel like you get the perfect, setting of 210 degrees Fahrenheit. To check it, just to make sure everything's okay, what I'll then do is I'll go back into that same hole, right? I'll stick it again and then pull this out. And what I'm looking for is a clean wooden, skewer. Or, you know, if you get a little bit, like right there on the very, very tip, I just had a little bit, that's fine. That's totally fine. But what you don't want is you don't want to pull this out and just have it covered in dough, very liquidy dough. That means that you're still underdone and you need to let it go a little bit longer. Or that's at least in my case. Okay, so if let's say now I only hit like 200 degrees Fahrenheit and it needs to come up another 10 degrees Fahrenheit, keeping the temperature the way it is, 465 degrees Fahrenheit, what I'll do is just put it back in there and just let it go for another 5 to 10 minutes. Like it depends like how many degrees you're down. Like if you're at 200 and you need to be at 210, I'll let it go for another 10 minutes. I mean, if you're at like 180, you might need to let it go another 10 to 15, maybe even 20 minutes. Like I said, it's all a process. You're going to have to experiment. The first time you're doing this, if you achieve perfection on the first try, give yourself a like because that's an accomplishment. It may take you 5 or even 10 times of baking your own bread to kind of figure out how your oven works, what the best, time frame is. You kind of get the idea. So that's why the temperature method of taking the temperature of the bread on the inside is really the most accurate. But like I said, if you hit 210 degrees Fahrenheit, you're in a good place. So that's how you kind of know when your bread is done. When your bread is done, take it out of the oven, put it on your, up here if you can, whatever this is called, the stovetop. What I like to do is using a towel, right? Or you might even use like something to flip the dough over, because remember, it's going to be hot. It's going to be at least like 210 degrees hot, if not hotter, right? What you want to do is you want to go ahead and flip it upside down. And what that does is that process of flipping it upside down, it just helps gravity in the reverse way so that your dough doesn't sink, right? Because it's been baking like this, and it's been pushing up as it bakes up and out. So when you flip it over after you take it out of the oven, now what you're doing is it's hanging, right? The inside is hanging so that you can keep more of that spongy structure, which is going to give you all of those nooks and crannies. Technical term there, right? Thomas's English muffin, you kind of get the idea. But it's going to give you more of that spongy texture on the inside. The last crucial bit I'll tell you in this video is you have to let the dough, or the final baguettes, or whatever you want to call these, the bread loaves, you have to let them sit at least for 2 hours before you cut into them. Because what happens is if you cut it like right now, I could easily say, oh my God, there's this little piece here, I'm just going to rip that off and taste it. What happens when you do that is, think of like a hot air balloon. If you rip into this and you break that seal where the crust has that beautiful seal going on around the whole thing, you're going to let all that hot air out, that hot steam, and it's just going to shrink, and the dough's going to like mush up. Like, you ever notice when you bake bread at home, maybe that's why you're watching this video, and you go to cut a slice and it just like squishes like a sponge squishes? You can help prevent that by just letting your bread sit for at least 2 hours so that the structure can kind of set. It's like setting cement or like setting whatever, but you kind of get the idea. You want to let it sit for 2 hours so that spongy structure in there with all those little nooks and crannies and those caverns and caves, and you kind of get the idea. You want to let that set so that then when you go to cut your bread, it'll still have that beautiful like structure of nooks and crannies. You kind of get the idea. So anyways, with that being said, I'll put some links down below in the description. Make sure to check those out. Also in the comment section, there'll be some links. And also on my Amazon storefront, there will be links. I'm the Old Coot, and I'll catch you all in the next exciting video.